Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and today I wanted to do something just a little bit different, and I want to talk about how I think we could fix the ground and air relationship in this game. Right now, there's a very delicate balance between the two. It seems like there's blanket nerfs to air, there's buffs and new abilities that are helping out anti-air. I'm not even calling for a straight up buff of air. I think there's too much going on in this game, and I think there's a lot of things that can happen that can really make the gameplay better for all. So keep that in mind. Now, you typically see a lot of my videos, I'm in the air. That's not all that I like to do. It's one of my favorite things to do, but I don't want you to think that I'm suggesting these changes just to benefit myself and other pilots, because that's just simply not the case. It's a hot button topic overall, and I'm not sure if it's still resentment from beta and shortly after when rocket pods were overpowered and people were being killed. But there's a lot of tension about this subject. I want to read you a post that I had on my TR lockdown video that was from Reddit. I unsubbed and removed my likes on your channel because of this video. All you did was QQ and complain about a feature that was day one feature in PS1. Deal with it. So you can see, I think there's a lot of hesitation to even talk about this issue, even though I think it's something that needs to be addressed, because for the benefit of all, this is what can really lead to a more balanced game. I love this game, and I want it to play as best as it possibly can, and I think as far as the balance goes, there's some changes that we could probably make that I think would benefit everybody. So, with that being said, try and keep an open mind when you're watching the rest of this video, and let's go ahead and jump into some of the changes that I'm suggesting. Alright, the first thing that I wanted to actually talk about is just some core changes to gameplay, and I think this is going to impact how some of the different vehicles and people are interacting with each other. The first one I wanted to suggest was actually raising the flight ceiling. Currently, we're sitting at about 1,000 meters, and for the most part, that works out okay. Now, the problem with that is it varies based on the terrain below. It's almost like it's calculating based off of sea level. So if you're in the southeastern warp gate on Endar, where the NC is right now, you may be 1,000 meters up in the air, but really you're only about 600 compared to the terrain that's around you. I don't think that mechanic is a problem, but I think there needs to be more room for aircraft. Now, what this is actually going to do is it's going to give more room for dogfighting, meaning that one-on-one air fights or big air battles can actually take place. Part of the reason that a lot of people don't fly is because they want to fight air to air, but they're so close to all the deterrents and counters that they can't actually engage in those battles. So this would open that up a little bit. It also makes it easier to avoid flak when you're flying at higher altitudes. You may not be spotted. The travel distance on the rounds is going to take longer to hit you, so you can kind of avoid those situations altogether. Now, one thing that we might need to do is limit the altitude based on the vehicles. For example, like the fighters should be able to go higher than maybe the libs or the galaxies. I don't think the libs should be able to sit at 2,000 meters and bomb targets just because they're looking at a map that they can't see on the ground. So there needs to be some form of balancing there. Another problem could potentially be that galaxies could be kind of immune up in the air unless they've got air battles. They could maybe drop from out of the sky. They're really hard to take down. I think there's some probably tweaking and thoughts that need to be done there. But another thing that I like is when you've got a higher ceiling, there's more aircraft, and that's going to encourage team play when using galaxies. All of a sudden, having a galaxy escort of a couple fighters is going to be a very important thing to see. Now, another thing that I would like to see, and this one might be a performance nightmare, so we'll put this in the wish list category, would be introducing clouds or some sort of weather event. I don't necessarily need to see rain falling out of the sky, but giving pilots the opportunity to kind of avoid flak by using cover in the air is helpful. You can do it on the ground. You should probably be able to use it in the sky. Again, I think that's probably a performance nightmare, so I don't think it's realistic, at least where the game stands right now, but it would definitely be something that I'd like to see implemented at some point. Now, there's three more things, and these are the really big ones that really just need to be fixed, is the rendering distance problem, specifically with bursters. Bursters got a little bit of a change, and you can see them from a little bit further out, but the big issue with the burster is that they can see you from so much farther than you can see them when you're the pilot. That means that you're getting hit before you even know where it's coming from, and you don't have any opportunity to actually engage that target. That's a pretty big issue, and that needs to be an even playing field. Ultimately, Burster Maxes really need to be treated more as a vehicle and have those same mechanics included. The next two are really kind of going about are going to relate to the striker. I'm fine with the striker in theory, but the two issues that I have is that flares don't always work to break the locks. It seems a lot of times what happens is that it'll break the very first missile, but then the other ones are still going to continue to hit you. You're supposed to have that, the time period after your flare goes off where people can't lock onto you again, but that doesn't seem to be happening with the striker. The other thing with the striker is the rockets need to follow a realistic path, not be able to dodge everything. If you're trying to run away from a hawk or a annihilator, those missiles can pretty easily, or not easily, but fairly easily be dodged by using terrain. You can break locks, you can lead the missiles into cliffs. That doesn't happen right now consistently with the striker. I've been hit after I've dove down the other side of a cliff and banked around under a bridge, and somehow these missiles are still continuing to lock onto you. So those are some core changes to gameplay that I think can help help the relationship. So let's go ahead and move on to changes to aircraft and how I think those roles should kind of be specialized. So you guys are probably sitting there saying, oh great, here's the pilot, let's hear about the buffs to air and the nerfs to AA. That's not what I'm calling for at all. However, I don't think that air should keep getting nerfed and AA should keep getting buffed based on the broken idea that I mentioned earlier that air is overpowered, that carries over from beta. It's just not really the case right now. But I still think there are some changes that need to be made with air. The first thing that I'd like to see done to fighters is I'd like to see the top speed increased for all of them across the board. What it does to help them out is it makes it easier to avoid lock-ons, and you can get out of situations where there's a lot of flak spam. Another side of this is that I'd like to see it be harder for you to slow down, meaning it's harder for you to farm infantry. It takes longer for you to kill your momentum. And it's also going to be more important for ESFs to specialize in air-to-air combat because you're going to be the main deterrent for other air vehicles. That's how it should be in this game right now, but it's not. The ground-based AA is the primary issue. Another change I'd like to see with increased top speed is a reduced hoverability. Now, I'd still think that the vehicle should be able to come to a stop, but I think they should lose altitude a lot quicker. This makes it much harder for you to sit there and spam infantry and vehicles with pods. It also helps to define the role of the Liberator a little bit better. Stationary firepower or continued fire on target. The Liberator, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, is a vehicle with an identity problem right now because its role is being taken over by the fighters. We need to define the difference between the two. And then also with the reduced hoverability, it's going to kind of help to decrease the effectiveness of lock-ons when people can't stay put for so long. Now, it's not necessarily decreasing the effectiveness of it, but you're going to die less to it because if you're sitting there hovering, you're doing something wrong and you deserve to die. When you're moving a little bit faster, you don't have as much to complain about because it's harder for you to actually be hit by these lock-ons. Another change I'd like to see with the fighters, I think that we should really be increasing the resource cost. Maybe it's like from 200 to 250, a slight adjustment. But one of the problems is the vehicles are so cheap right now that it's really easy to keep spamming them versus actually learning to stay alive and to be better. Another way that you could go about that would be increasing the time it takes to acquire another one, the passive timer. Now, you should still be able to reduce it, but I think one of those needs to be done. And the last piece here with the fighters is I don't think you should necessarily have to be 100% specialized against a certain target like air, ground, or armor, but you should be able to. You could maybe have a all-around craft and be the master of none, but what I think we need to do is with our secondary weapon options, I think we need another one introduced. We currently have the air-to-air missiles, which I think need to stay. We've got the afterburner, which I think needs to stay. What really should happen is that the rocket pod should split into two categories, specializing in one option being anti-infantry pods, probably with a high splash damage like we used to see. And then I think with anti-armor pods, I think what we need to see is almost more of an armor-penetrating round. Really rewards high accuracy, but very low splash damage. What that does is by choosing your secondary options, you are specializing in a particular role. And that's going to make it's going to kind of counteract the main problem that most people have with the rocket pods right now, that they are good at attacking everything. So, slight change. Your primary options, I think, should still stay the same, with probably a couple more Empire-specific options out there. You've got to, like, for example, I think the rotary is a great option for air-to-air, but it's not bad for air-to-ground either, and I think that should stay the same. I think you have variety in your nose gun, and your secondary options are where you really learn to specialize a little bit. Alright, so with the Liberator, I already mentioned that it's a vehicle with an identity crisis, and it doesn't really have a role right now. Now, the biggest issue that's happened to the Liberator is with the splash damage nerf that came a couple game updates back. The problem was it didn't actually just impact a specific vehicle. It took away splash damage from pods, from cannons, from turrets, from basically anything that fired a canister like a tank round. What we're seeing now is with the Liberator, you've got 3 secondary options. You've got the Zephyr, the Dalton, and the Shredder. Well, the Zephyr with the lower splash damage isn't really being used very effectively anymore. The Dalton is where everybody's running to because you have to be accurate regardless, and the Dalton is going to help kind of benefit that. The Shredder isn't really used that much, but it's a really good choice. So what I think we need to see is kind of pull back, maybe not all the way, but pull back some on the splash damage reduction. The Zephyr needs to be defined as an anti-infantry weapon. Now again, maybe this goes back to like the pods. It's fairly effective against, ground armored targets, but it's really effective against infantry. The Dalton should be the one with less splash damage. I'd even be okay seeing that come down a little bit more, but it should have a huge direct impact benefit, making it a clear choice for anti-vehicle. And the Shredder right now is kind of the master of none, the Renaissance man that can do a little bit of everything, but it should be the decent all-around choice. It's the only one that's really good against anti-air, unless you're not a good shot with the Dalton cannon. It's not bad against moving targets, and you actually put a lot of damage down really fast, especially when you start talking about upgrading it a bit. Ultimately, they need to be just tweaked a little bit in order to define each secondary and make them all a viable choice. Right now, I'd say probably about 90% of the libs you hop in are going to have the Dalton on them. That kind of tells you where the balance between those falls. The other thing with the Liberator is I don't think they shouldn't really necessarily need more armor, outside unless you actually put composite armor in the defense slot, but it should have an increased effectiveness against the Burster. Now, maybe that's based on a reduced range to the Burster or the wider spread, and those are things we're going to talk about here in just a sec. But the Liberator dies a little bit too fast based on what its role would suggest. So, some of those changes are going to come into play here with the Bursters. Now, when we start talking about changes to anti-air, I think the conversation obviously has to start with Bursters. The big problem with Bursters right now is that they can be pulled from every single base. They can be pulled from any terminal. They can be pulled from a Sunderer. And I don't think that's a problem in and of itself. You should be able to pull an anti-air deterrent anywhere that you want to because air can be a problem. That being said, you shouldn't be able to pull your best anti-air option out of thin air whenever you need one. So, with that being said, I think there's changes that need to actually happen with the Bursters. I think the focus needs to be on stopping fighters and libs from farming infantry and defending small outposts. It shouldn't necessarily be defending an entire area or locking down a portion of a map with your cheapest option. So the first thing that actually came to my mind was that maybe what we do is we limit the travel distance of flak. Maybe like a different type of round from the Burster. Think about like airburst flak from like World War II movies that detonates after a certain distance. What this could do is it could create a deterrent to the zone. Maybe it even distorts the view of the pilot as he's entering the battlefield. And this seemed like a good idea in theory, but then I started thinking, I've already talked about, increasing the flight ceiling in this game. So then maybe we have Liberators that are flying a little bit too high, meaning that they could just pick off targets without that deterrent actually being able to do any damage to them. So how could we account for that? And I think this is what really probably should happen. We need to focus on increasing the cone of fire and making it significantly wider on the Bursters, meaning that it's going to do a lot less damage when the vehicles are at high altitude or moving very quickly, because it's harder to stay on target and land all of your shots. What this would do for you is it creates a shorter distance effective unit. If you've got somebody I don't know, at a different base, you're not going to be able to do a ton of damage. You may take some pot shots, but what you're doing is you're turning this vehicle into more of a deterrent at long range and effective at close range. I think that's the role that needs to happen with the bursters. I think the resources needed to actually purchase a burster should go up as well. 100 certs for the most, or 100 certs, 100 resource points for the most effective unit right now is way too low. And then another one would be, I did the videos already, Zealot Overdrive, Lockdown, Aegis. None of those should be able to apply to bursters. I don't want those abilities to make bursters any better for any faction. I think it needs to be an even playing field across the board. Now, when we start talking about the Sky Guards, I think this is what should really be the grand poobah of anti-air. It should really be the one that's focusing on stopping air and be effective against air in all situations. So whether that be at distance, close range, fast-moving targets, anything like that, I think is where the Sky Guard should really excel. Now, it currently doesn't fit that role. So there's some changes that I think should be made to the Sky Guards. Now, the first one is going to be kind of the opposite of what we're doing to the burster. I think the cone of fire and the felt recoil needs to be reduced a little bit. I think it needs to have a tight cone that's doing a lot of damage regardless of the distance that you are from the target. I think the muzzle velocity should probably be increased a little bit too, meaning that you don't have to lead your targets as much. This would be something that would differentiate the burster from the Sky Guard, giving the Sky Guard a clear advantage. The other thing that probably really needs to happen is that the magazine size on the Sky Guard as a default should probably be increased as well, meaning that you're not having to reload as frequently, especially since you don't have two arms of anti-air to do some work. Now, I've heard before that the Sky Guard is okay right now as it is because of mobility. Now, if you think about it, yes, mobility is a benefit for the Sky Guard. It's a fast vehicle. However, it's kind of negated right now through the burster's ability to hide indoors and shoot from indoors, and you can move behind a tree and be pretty safe because of where the splash damage currently is in the game. There isn't really a purpose to the Sky Guard right now, and I think by making it the clear winner as far as the between the two options there is going to encourage more people to actually buy and play the Sky Guard. Now, why am I making such a push towards the Sky Guard? Why does it matter? Well, there's two reasons for that. The first one is the Sky Guard costs a little bit more. And I'm not talking certs, I'm talking in resources. It costs more for you to pull a Sky Guard, meaning that to have the most beneficial option for anti-air, you're going to need to spend a little bit more to get it out. The big reason that I want this is kind of based on what I mentioned before. Bursters can be pulled anywhere. You shouldn't necessarily be able to pull your best option at any location. What this does is it encourages meta play. It encourages you to keep connections to bigger bases so you can pull your best option forward. It'll keep that deterrent, that high-level, high-power option against air available by keeping bases that you need available as well. So, I think there's a lot of benefits to kind of switching those roles, and I think those are the two ways that you would actually get around doing that. I think base turrets, where they're at, as far as like phalanx turrets, are about right. I think it's kind of the balance between where the burster and Sky Guard should be. It's a valuable asset that encourages attackers to kill those quickly and defenders to keep them up. It encourages team play, and I think it fits a pretty important role, but I think it's about right where it stands right now. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on what we actually need to do in order to get this relationship between air and ground and anti-air into places where they should be. There's just too many moving parts and too much going on to just nerf or buff one specific thing. I think there needs to be some changes across the board that I think would result in better gameplay for all. We're talking about we're talking about making the fighters better in some areas and worse in others, and making them specialize in some certain things. When we're talking about anti-air, we're talking about defined roles for bursters and Sky Guards and making them align with the resource costs a little bit better. And then some changes to gameplay too that are going to help define roles for different vehicles and really just give you more options as far as what you're doing on the offense and how you defend against people when they're engaging you. So, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'd love to hear if you disagree or agree, but I think these are some good ideas that could probably pan out well. So yeah, that's pretty much it. If you liked the video, please hit like, subscribe if you haven't already, and stay tuned for more. And I'll talk to you guys later. Take care.